I want to tell you about a laptop. Not because it's an expensive laptop or a special one. It's just a silver one with a sticker on the corner from a design conference I went to 3 years ago, half peeled off now. But 5 days before my wedding, that laptop was sitting closed on Barbara's dining room table, under my right hand, and I hadn't said a single word in almost 10 minutes. Barbara, my fiancé's mother, was still talking. She had that voice she used at family gatherings, warm and a little too polished, the voice she used when she wanted a room to agree with her before anyone had time to think it over. She was telling Tom's aunts and uncles, gently, sympathetically, that I'd let the planning get away from me. That it happens. That brides get overwhelmed. That maybe. And here her voice softened even further, like she hated to even suggest it. Maybe it was time to consider a different venue for Saturday. One that was conveniently already available. One that belonged to a family she liked quite a bit more than mine. I sat there. My hand didn't move off the laptop. If you'd been in that room, you might have thought I looked frozen. Overwhelmed, maybe, exactly the way Barbara was describing. My future aunts and uncles certainly seemed to think so, glancing at me with the kind of soft, pitying expressions people give someone they've already decided has lost. But I wasn't frozen. I was waiting. To understand why I could sit there that calm, with my whole wedding apparently unraveling in front of a table full of relatives who barely knew me. You have to go back 4 months earlier, to an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when Barbara handed me a brand new iPad, still in its box, and asked me, in that same warm voice, if I'd mind setting it up for her. I said yes, of course. I always said yes to Barbara. That's actually the whole reason any of this happened at all. My name is Elena. I'm 33, and I run a small graphic design business out of a converted spare bedroom in the house I share with my fiancé, Tom. It's not glamorous. Most days it's just me, 3 monitors, and a lot of client emails. But I built it from nothing over the last 7 years, one small project at a time, until it could actually support me. I'm proud of that in a quiet way. Nobody handed it to me. Tom and I have been together 3 years. He's steady, funny in a dry way that took me a while to learn to laugh at. And he loves me in the uncomplicated way I didn't know I'd been waiting for until I had it. When he proposed on a Tuesday in our kitchen, nothing about a mountain or a sunset, just him getting down on one knee while I was mid-sentence about pasta. That's when I really knew, that I wanted a life with him. The complicated part was always his mother. I remember one of our early dinners together, before we were even officially serious. I'd worn a green dress I loved, and Barbara had looked me over and said warmly, "That's such a brave color for your skin tone." I remember laughing along with it in the moment, the way you do, and then sitting in the car afterward feeling something I couldn't quite name sitting heavy in my stomach. That became the pattern. Barbara never said anything you could point to directly. Every comment had an exit built into it. I'm just saying, I only mean this with love. You know I adore you. And because nothing she said was ever quite an insult, I never felt like I had permission to name it as one. I just absorbed it and told myself it didn't mean anything and moved on. When Tom and I got engaged, that pattern became wedding planning. Barbara offered to help almost immediately, with the seating chart, with a few vendors, with just being a resource, she said, since she'd planned 2 of her sister's weddings and knew how these things went. Each offer came with an invisible thread attached. Her opinion had to be considered, her preference had to be weighed, her involvement had to be acknowledged, or the offer quietly curdled into disappointment. I funded a good portion of the wedding myself, out of my design income. Partly because I could, partly, if I'm honest, because letting Barbara pay for things always seemed to cost more in control than it ever saved me in money. I told myself over and over that her comments didn't mean anything. I wonder now how much that cost me, without my noticing. Let me tell you what an ordinary week looked like back before any of this started, because I think it matters. I'd wake up early, make coffee, and be at my desk by 8, answering client emails, sketching logo concepts, the kind of quiet, satisfying work that made me feel like myself. Tom would leave for the office around the same time, and most evenings we'd cook together, badly, laughing about it, one of us always burning something. Wedding planning happened in the in-between hours. Venue tours on Saturday mornings. Cake tastings squeezed between client calls. A shared spreadsheet Tom and I built together, color-coded, that made the whole thing feel manageable, even fun, when it was just the two of us. Barbara had a way of finding her way into that spreadsheet, though, not maliciously, not at first. A comment here about the florist we'd chosen, not really elevating the space. A suggestion there about a band she knew, so much better than whoever you found, delivered with a smile that made it feel rude to decline. Tom, for his part, always tried to smooth things over between us. She just wants to be involved, he'd say. She means well. I believed him, mostly because I wanted to. There was a particular Tuesday, about 4 months before the wedding, that I didn't think much of at the time. Barbara called and asked if I could come by and help her set up a new iPad she'd bought. I'm hopeless with these things, she said, laughing at herself in that self-deprecating way she used when she wanted something. Tom's always busy, and you're so good with computers. I went over that afternoon. I remember sitting at her kitchen table, walking her through account setup, syncing her calendar, showing her how to check her email. At some point, almost as an afterthought, I connected her new device to the shared cloud drive I'd set up for wedding vendor documents, contracts, invoices, correspondence, so that if she needed to pull something up, she could, without texting me every time. It felt considerate. It felt like exactly the kind of small, generous thing that might finally bridge the gap between us. I didn't think about it again for months. I want you to hold on to that Tuesday, though, the way I eventually had to. Because everything that came after, every phone call, every misunderstanding, every quiet maneuver, traces back to that one ordinary afternoon and a kindness I never expected to need. 2 weeks before the wedding, I was in my studio, surrounded by half-finished seating chart mock-ups, when my phone rang. It was the venue's events coordinator, a cheerful woman named Priya I'd worked with for months. Hi, Elena. Just calling to confirm the change of booking name, she said, breezy, like this was routine. We got the request a few days ago. Just want to make sure everything's still good on our end before Saturday. I sat very still. Change of booking name? I didn't request any change. There was a pause on her end, the kind that makes your stomach drop before anyone says anything else. Oh, I'm so sorry, let me just check this again. I heard typing. It says here the request came through from the point of contact on file. That's Barbara Marsh. I looked down at my desk, at the seating charts I'd been color-coding an hour earlier, and felt something shift cold and slow in my chest. I listed her as a secondary contact for vendor coordination, I said carefully. Not to make changes to the actual booking. I understand, Priya said, her voice gentler now, sensing something was wrong. I'll hold everything as is until we sort this out. I'm sorry for the confusion. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long moment, not quite panicking, not yet. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was confusion. The specific, disorienting confusion of realizing a piece of your life has been touched by someone else's hands without your permission, and you don't yet know why. I thought about calling Tom immediately. I thought about calling Barbara. Instead, I sat there a little longer, turning the word reassigned over in my mind, feeling a colder, more careful kind of attention settle into me. The kind I didn't recognize yet as suspicion, because I still wanted so badly to believe it was a mistake. That evening, I brought it up with Tom and Barbara together, over dinner at her house. I laid it out as plainly as I could. The call from Priya, the confusion about the booking name, the fact that I hadn't requested anything. Barbara's face arranged itself into concern almost instantly, smooth and practiced. That's so strange, she said, setting down her fork. It must be a mix-up on their end. These venues are always disorganized. Honestly, I'm not surprised. I nodded, wanting to believe it, wanting the easy explanation. And then, almost before I'd finished processing that, Barbara continued, her voice softening into something almost thoughtful. You know, since we're already dealing with this, I ran into Diane the other day, Vanessa's mother, and she mentioned their lake house is completely open that weekend. It really is beautiful out there. Might be worth considering just in case. I felt the conversation tilt under me. We'd gone, in the space of 30 seconds, from fixing a mistake to fielding a completely different venue suggestion. One that happened to belong to a family Barbara had mentioned warmly more times than I could count over the past year. "I don't think we need to consider anything else," I said, as evenly as I could manage. "I just need the original booking corrected." Of course, Barbara said quickly, holding up her hands. "I only mention it in case it helps." I looked at Tom. He gave me a small, tired smile, the kind that said, "Let's not make this a whole thing tonight." I let it go. I told myself it was one comment, easily ignored. Over the following days, the one comment didn't stay one comment. Tom started mentioning the lake house himself, gently, almost apologetically, like he didn't fully understand why he kept bringing it up. "Maybe it's worth just looking at it," he said one night, not quite meeting my eyes. "Just to have options. In case the venue thing doesn't get sorted in time." "It's not a real option, Tom. It's not our venue. I chose ours." I know, he said, rubbing his forehead. "I just don't want us to be stuck with nowhere to go 5 days before the wedding, that's all." I understood, on some level, that he wasn't trying to hurt me. He was tired, and he wanted the path of least resistance between his mother and his fiancé, and right now the path of least resistance looked like humoring Barbara's suggestion instead of pushing back on it. But I felt something small and important slipping away from me in those conversations, not because anyone told me no directly, but because I could feel myself being maneuvered toward giving something up without ever being asked outright. That's a particular kind of exhausting, I've learned. Being pressured by suggestion instead of demand. You can't push back on something nobody officially said. I didn't explode. I didn't cry in front of Tom, though I wanted to more than once, sitting in my studio late at night, staring at the seating chart I'd built with so much care. I just felt something in me go quiet and watchful in a way it hadn't been before. The same quiet, careful attention I used at work when a client's numbers didn't quite add up, and I needed to find out why before I said anything at all. By the following week, I felt like I was fighting a fight I couldn't actually see. The venue still hadn't fully corrected the booking. Priya was apologetic but slow, caught in some internal process I didn't fully understand yet. Barbara continued mentioning the lake house, lightly at every opportunity, like a stone she kept skipping across the same pond. Tom had stopped pushing it directly, but he'd also stopped defending the original venue with any real conviction, which felt somehow worse. I sat in my studio one evening, seating chart open on my screen, cursor blinking uselessly over a table I hadn't finished assigning. I thought about the version of this wedding I'd imagined a year ago. Simple, mine chosen. And I thought about how quickly that version seemed to be dissolving, not through any single dramatic moment, but through 100 small nudges I couldn't quite name or fight. I remember thinking clearly for the first time, I might actually lose this. Not just the venue. The version of my own wedding where I got to decide anything. I didn't call anyone that night. I sat there long enough that my coffee went cold beside the keyboard, untouched, and I didn't notice until I reached for it and found its stone temperature against my hand. I looked out the window at the dark street outside, at Tom's car in the driveway, and felt, for the first time in the whole engagement, genuinely unsure whether I had the strength to keep being the easy one. I didn't know yet that the answer to all of this was already sitting quietly in a folder I hadn't thought to open in months. The next morning, out of a professional habit more than any real plan, I called Priya back and asked her to forward me the original email chain about the booking change. It's something I do with every client contract, every vendor agreement, get it in writing, always, no matter how small the disagreement seems. I didn't expect it to reveal anything. I just wanted to see the paper trail. Priya forwarded it within the hour, slightly apologetic, saying she probably should have sent it over sooner. I opened the email chain at my desk, scanning through it quickly at first, the way you skim something you expect to be boring. And then something caught, snagged, made me stop and scroll back up. The reassignment request had come from an email address that looked, at a glance, exactly like mine. elena.marsh.design. Except the address in the email header read elena.marsh.degin. One tiny transposition. The kind of thing you'd never notice unless you were looking directly at it, character by character, the way 7 years of proofing client contracts had trained me to look at everything. I sat back in my chair, my heart suddenly loud in my own ears. Someone had made an email address that looked almost exactly like mine. Someone had used it to request a change to my own wedding booking. This wasn't a mix-up. Mix-ups don't come with fake email addresses built to pass a quick glance. I didn't call anyone yet. I just sat there, staring at that one swapped pair of letters, feeling the first real crack open in a story I'd been trying to talk myself into believing. I called Priya back that afternoon, my voice steadier than I actually felt. Is there any way to see what device sent that email? Anything on your end that logs it? She hesitated. I can check with our IT contact. Since this affects an actual booking now, it's within reason for us to look into it. Give me a bit. While I waited, I did something I hadn't let myself do in months. I actually sat down and thought carefully, methodically, about every strange little moment of the past year. Barbara's comments that always had an exit built in. Her insistence on being listed as a secondary vendor contact. Her repeated, oddly persistent mentions of the lake house, and of Vanessa, a family friend's daughter I'd met exactly twice, both times feeling Barbara's eyes flick briefly between the two of us, like she was running a comparison she never quite finished out loud. Priya called back 2 days later. Our system logged the request from an iPad, she said. I can't give you a name attached to the device, obviously, but the model and the timestamp are here if it helps. I thanked her, hung up, and sat with the words and iPad turning slowly over in my mind. And then, all at once, the memory surfaced, clear, specific, for months old. Barbara's kitchen table. A box still sealed. Her voice self-deprecating. I'm hopeless with these things. Me setting up her accounts, syncing her calendar, connecting her new device to the shared cloud drive I'd built for wedding vendor documents, without a second thought, because it felt considerate. Because I wanted so badly, for one gesture between us to land as kindness instead of obligation. I put my head in my hands at my desk, not out of despair this time, but out of something closer to disbelief. I hadn't been careless. I'd been generous in exactly the way that made this possible. I didn't say anything to Tom or Barbara right away. I needed a day to actually think, to understand what I might be looking at before I said a word out loud that I couldn't take back. I opened my laptop that evening and navigated to the shared cloud drive. The same one I'd built months earlier for wedding vendor documents, contracts, invoices, correspondence. I hadn't looked at the activity log in weeks. When I finally clicked into it, my stomach tightened. Barbara's iPad was still connected. Still syncing. Every email she'd sent from that device, including, I now saw with a kind of quiet, spreading dread, several drafts she clearly hadn't meant for anyone else to see, had been quietly saving itself into a folder I still had full access to. I sat there for a long time before I let myself actually open the folder. Inside were drafts. Not just the reassignment request, though that was there too, time-stamped and unmistakable. There were message drafts to the lake house venue, casual, warm, discussing timing and how best to present the change once it was already done, so that, as one draft put it, there won't really be much for her to object to by then. There was a message to someone I assumed was Diane, Vanessa's mother, thanking her for keeping the weekend open, just in case things work out the way we're hoping. I read it all twice. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. I think I'd already known on some level for days. I just hadn't let myself say it in words until I saw it written in Barbara's own careful, deliberate phrasing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't overzealous helpfulness gone slightly wrong. This was a plan, built quietly over months, using a piece of trust I'd handed her myself, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon I'd almost forgotten about. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while, not deciding anything yet, just letting the shape of what I now knew settle into place. I want to be honest about something. My first instinct wasn't to march into Barbara's house and confront her immediately. I've never been that person, and this wasn't the moment to suddenly become her. Instead, I spent the next 2 days doing what I know how to do, being careful, methodical, the same way I handle a client dispute over a contract. I saved everything. Screenshots of the folder, timestamps intact, in case anything ever got deleted or disputed later. I printed out the email chain from Priya, along with her note about the device log. I didn't tell Tom yet, not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted him to see the evidence clearly all at once, rather than hear a half-formed accusation first and have to catch up emotionally while I explained. Barbara, in the meantime, announced a family dinner, framed warmly as an attempt to sort everything out together before the wedding. I understood, reading between the lines, exactly what that dinner was actually for. A stage set carefully, where she'd proposed the lake house in front of an audience sympathetic enough and overwhelmed enough by the ticking clock to simply go along with it. I didn't try to stop the dinner. I let her build the stage. I just made sure that when I walked into that dining room, I wasn't walking in empty-handed. The night before, I sat with Tom in our kitchen and told him calmly that I needed to show him something before dinner the next day. Not a big dramatic reveal, just a request, quiet and direct. I need you to trust me on something tomorrow, I said. I'll explain everything, but I need you to wait until I do. He looked at me for a long moment, something serious settling into his face. Okay, he said. I trust you. I believed him. I needed to, walking into that dinner the next day, laptop in my bag ready. The dining room looked exactly the way you'd expect. A table set a little too formally for a family dinner, Barbara's aunts and uncles arranged around it, the good china out. Barbara was in her element, warm and hostess bright, guiding the conversation exactly where she wanted it to go. By the time dessert plates were being cleared, she reached the moment she'd clearly been building toward all evening. She set down her coffee cup, looked around the table with practiced gentleness, and said, I think, honestly, for Elena's sake, since things have clearly gotten a little overwhelming for her, the lake house really is the sensible option at this point. I hate to say it, but I don't see another way, with so little time left. A few heads nodded, sympathetic, already halfway to agreeing. I set my laptop on the table and opened it. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to understand that, because I think it mattered more than anything else I could have done in that moment. I pulled up the folder, angled the screen so Tom, sitting beside me, could see it clearly, and said quietly, Before we decide anything, I think everyone should see this. I clicked open the reassignment email first, the lookalike address, one letter swapped, time-stamped from an iPad. Then the draft messages to the lake house venue, discussing timing, discussing how to present the change once it was already done. Then the message to Diane, thanking her for holding the weekend, just in case things work out the way we're hoping. The table went silent in a way I've never heard a room go silent before. Barbara's face didn't crumble immediately. For a moment, she tried to recover, her voice reaching for its usual smooth concern. I have no idea what happened there. That must be some kind of mistake. I don't even know how. It's from your iPad, I said, still quiet, still even. The one I set up for you in April. I connected it to the same cloud drive I use for our wedding vendor documents. Everything you've sent from it since then has been syncing into a folder I still have access to. I didn't go looking for this. I just finally checked. Tom, beside me, had gone very still, reading the screen with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not anger exactly, not yet, but something more like the floor dropping out from under an assumption he'd been standing on his whole life. Mom, he said, and his voice had an edge I'd never heard him use with her. Is this real? Barbara didn't answer right away. That silence was its own kind of answer. I closed the laptop gently. I just wanted my own wedding, I said, to the table, not just to her. At the venue I chose. Without anyone deciding behind my back that I couldn't handle planning it myself. Tom turned to his mother. The wedding is happening at the original venue, he said. With Elena. This conversation is over. Barbara didn't confess outright, not that night. She sat very still for a long moment, the practiced warmth gone from her face, replaced by something tighter, more careful. Eventually she said quietly that she only wanted what was best, and excused herself from the table. Nobody followed her. The dinner ended without shouting, without dramatic exits beyond that one. Just a heavy, altered silence that sat over the table until people started, quietly, gathering their things to leave. One of Tom's aunts squeezed my hand on her way out and said simply, I'm glad you checked. The next morning, I called Priya and forwarded her everything, the screenshots, the timestamps, the device log she'd already helped trace. Within a few hours, the original booking was fully restored. There was no legal fight, no lawyers involved. Just documentation clear enough that nobody could argue with it. I didn't call Barbara to gloat, and I didn't avoid her calls either, when she finally reached out a few days later. I told her, honestly, that I still wanted her at the wedding, if she could be respectful of it. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. I don't think I was ready for that yet, and I'm not sure I owed it to her on any particular timeline. It was more that I refused to let what she'd done become the whole story of my wedding, even though it had nearly derailed it entirely. Tom and I didn't talk much about it in the days that followed, not because we were avoiding it, but because there wasn't much left to say. He'd seen it clearly in black and white on my laptop screen, and he hadn't needed convincing after that. That mattered more to me than any apology from Barbara ever could have. The wedding happened 3 weeks later, exactly where it was supposed to happen. Barbara came. She was quieter than usual, seated a little further from the head table than she probably would have chosen for herself. But she came, and she was polite, and for one day, that was enough. I didn't spend my wedding day thinking about the folder, or the fake email address, or the dinner table where everything finally came apart. I spent it thinking, oddly, about the version of myself who almost talked herself out of checking that first email chain, who almost let "it's probably nothing" win the way it had won so many times before. Walking down the aisle, I caught Tom's eye, and for the first time in 3 years of trying to be easy, trying to be agreeable, trying to earn my way into acceptance, I felt like I had simply arrived. Not performing anything. Just myself on my own terms in the place I'd chosen. I've thought a lot since then about what those months actually taught me. For a long time, I measured my worth in that family by how much friction I could quietly absorb without ever naming it. I thought being easy was the same thing as being loved. What I learned instead is that paying attention to small inconsistencies, to comments that don't quite sit right, to the quiet feeling that something's being decided without you, isn't suspicion, and it isn't difficult. It's self-respect. I didn't win that dinner table by being loud, or by fighting the way I'd always been afraid fighting would look. I won it by refusing, finally, to talk myself out of what I'd already noticed. That's the part one hopes stays with you. If any of this sounds familiar, you don't have to raise your voice to be believed. Sometimes you just have to trust yourself enough to open the folder.